Okay, so yeah, my name's Tom Cardwell, and I'm permanently based in London at University of the Arts. But for the past year, until August, I was in Helsinki doing a postdoctoral fellowship at the Helsinki Collegium for Advanced Studies, hence my double attribution, as it were, on the programme. But today I'm going to be talking about what may be a slightly cryptic title, but it's not really that cryptic a subject. So I'm looking at the relationship between heavy metal clothing, particularly battle jackets, and chasubles, which are decorated priest robes, which have a long history in church tradition and links to other types of religious garments. So the background to this, I guess, or the kind of overall questions, and just to say, this is definitely not a presentation where I'm going to answer all these questions or even really get into detail on all of them, but these are the overarching questions that I'm thinking about, so these are what are informing the discussion and the investigation today. So first of all, as I've mentioned, what are the connections between metal clothing, particularly, for me, it's particularly battle jackets, but also t-shirts, customization, jeans, things like that, and religious garments. In what ways are metal clothing styles transgressive? And that might perhaps seem like a very obvious one, but I'll touch on it briefly. How might battle jackets be better understood as some kind of chasuble? And can we make links between the role of the metal musician and fan and religious participants? And again, that's not something that I'm going to get into on a deep level kind of sociologically, and I'm sure there are other people here or listening who have more expertise in that area, particularly in the performative area, but I'm going to be talking about representation through clothing and imagery particularly. So I guess the background to this project is my own PhD, which I did between 2012 and 2017, and I was focusing particularly on battle jackets, and as well as meeting people, talking to them about their jackets, writing about jackets, I also made a lot of painting, so I was making paintings of people's jackets, and that was a big part of the research. So I'm an artist as well as a researcher, so the two kind of went quite closely together for me. These are two of the photos from the project, people that I met and talked to. And once I finished the PhD, after a couple of years, I developed that into a book with Intellect, which was published about a year ago, Heavy Metal Armour, which includes all the paintings and a kind of updated version, an enhanced version of the text, which looks at different angles for considering why battle jackets are important, particularly from a kind of art historical angle. So that's the background, and I guess a lot of what I say today is in a way informed by all that research, but the exact kind of focus and formulation here is something new that I'm now thinking about. Sorry, my caption has reformatted itself, but ignore that. So first of all, I suppose we'll all be aware of this. Anyone who's in metal culture will know that values of loyalty to metal, loyalty to bands that you're interested in, are very important for anyone in their clothing, whether that's a band t-shirt, but particularly if it's a jacket, because of the investment in the jacket in terms of time and money and energy, collecting patches that's sometimes quite hard to get hold of, and especially pre-internet. You know, it was much more of a task to locate a particular patch. You know, you might have to go to the show, see the band live, that might be the only way you could get the patch if they were not a really well-known band. But even now it can be quite hard to track down particular patches, and if you go on forums or Instagram accounts, you have people talking about how to get a particular patch or asking where you can get one. So there's that sense that there's a lot of investment in it, so it represents this kind of loyalty to metal. And so there's a quote from my research, someone saying it's expressive, it's who you are, it's definitely important. And she was talking about jacket making. And then another fan, who was also in quite a well-known band, he said they should represent your life, that is the jackets. And in this case, my life in bands, like the bike jackets, you only get a patch if you've done something to get it. You have to earn them by being there and getting it and saying, I was there and here's the proof. And that's how I treat the jacket. So that kind of sums up, for me, a lot of the motivation for people making jackets and why it can seem so important. And people maybe feel there's a lot of importance in the choices of not just the band choices, but how you put patches on. You know, do you put more than one patch in the same band or not? That kind of thing. Some people might feel you have to have a particular genre represented in a jacket. Other people might not observe that. But of course, in metal, there's a lot of importance placed on being authentic, and I haven't got time to get into debates about what authenticity is, but that term comes up a lot in subcultural metal literature, and we'll all be aware, probably in the scenes that we're in or being involved in, that there's a high value placed on authenticity, and this is summed up maybe in the use of phrases like death to posers, which has come up as even as a song title on several occasions, but it's the kind of thing that sums up the value of authenticity in metal. And in metal, of course, there's strong communities. So Anna Backer's research, she highlights that although there are different genres, different sort of sub-communities with metal, that none of that seems to impair, as she puts it, an overwhelming sense of community of all metalheads. So there's this sense that people feel united in metals to some extent. David Muggleton, not writing particularly about metal, but he's talking about postmodern subcultures. He says, invoking a reference group enables certain individuals to emphasise their insider status as members of an esoteric subterranean scene through self-exclusion from a larger category of uninitiated outsiders. And insiders and outsiders is a term that's come up quite a lot in conversations I've had with metalheads. And another person I talked to, this is a quote from them, they said, metalheads are outsiders from popular culture and the mainstream and all that because we choose to be that way, to become part of this underground community of people. You tend to exclude the mainstream from your insider-outsider, that's just how she puts it, because you're an outsider, but you're inside of this outsider culture. So yes, so I do think that metalheads like to wear their vests because it gives you the opportunity to meet other metalheads, because someone can see you from down the street and say, oh, I love that patch, I want to talk to that person, because you have that connection, whereas everyone else walking around the city is not going to understand. So again, I think that's a quote I don't need to add too much to. It gives you that sense of the insider-outsider relationship, perhaps. So I guess that's giving a bit of background about jackets and why they're important. Of course, the conference title is Metal and Transgression, so I should talk a bit about transgression. I think I want to maybe just touch on that in two ways. First of all is to point out, and this is something that I wanted to do through my research and through the book, was to chart kind of history of battle jackets, a sort of informal network that I'd say battle jackets are a part of. And this links to lots of other kinds of customised clothing, both on an informal side, and in this little map here that I made, you can see examples like the Rockers jacket in the middle from the sort of 1950s era, motorcycle culture. You can see the Pearly King outfit. Pearly Kings were effectively salespeople in London in the late 19th, early 20th century, and they would decorate their suits with buttons, and the buttons would spell out the name of the place they were from and the place where they would work. So that example there, Pearly King of Wappings, so that's an area of the docks in East London. So there was this strong sense that these suits, both of them were handmade and they would represent a location, represent a place. So there's that sense of authenticity. Other examples here, of course, punk jackets, which are in many ways fairly close to battle jackets. and then lots of examples from military connections. So I guess there's a history that we could say goes back through music subcultures to biker cultures, some of the outlaw bike clubs like the Hells Angels, etc. And those in turn have strong links to military, to people coming out of army post-World War II or post-Vietnam, and forming these groups that operated in many ways like military units, and in some ways have a kind of uniform that goes with that. So going way back, then there's examples from heraldry, and heraldry, coats of arms being a way to identify people on the battlefield. So I think there are links that go through customization and folk clothing and military clothing. And very often those have a sense of transgression, or they have done in the past. So I think that metal style today, with its links to all of these things, and very clear links in the use of, say, denim, which of course has a long history as a wet fabric, blue collar fabric, and leather being associated with motorcycle gangs, and before that with military uniform, and all of the customization involved in that. So I think in just even the materials of metal style, there are these links or these sort of subtexts of transgression. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, of course, there's the imagery itself, and we'll all be able to think of examples of metal imagery that's deliberately meant to be a little bit maybe offensive or shocking, maybe very offensive or shocking. In some cases, you know, there have been cases of bans on particular images like the Cradle of Filth Nun t-shirt, etc. People have been arrested for wearing that. So there's examples where the imagery can become quite extreme in a deliberate sense, particularly with like death and grime bands. You know, there's often very sort of grotesque, over-the-top grotesque imagery. So there's lots of writing about that, about the use of imagery and text to shock, which I've put a little bit in the slide there. And I've talked a bit in my writing about how the jacket or the t-shirt can act as a kind of shibboleth, as a way that fans decide who's an insider or an outsider, essentially. To use what they're wearing as a way of either connecting to someone or, you know, doing the opposite, sort of separating himself away from anyone who wouldn't want to look at that imagery. So, again, without getting too far into that, I think there's lots of examples of how metal imagery at least courts the idea of the transgressive. To what extent it's genuinely transgressive is another debate, I think, and in some cases it genuinely is, but I think many of the images that perhaps once upon a time would have seemed quite shocking or offensive now are fairly, have been seen so much that they're less shocking. You know, thinking about like the Iron Maiden or Metallica artworks, which maybe in the early 1980s were a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more shocking to people, but now have been seen to the point that they're fairly ubiquitous. So maybe it takes a bit more as time goes on. So yeah, I talked a little bit before about battle vests and heraldry, and here's a comparison with a tunic from 1647 that's in the Rijksmuseum, and then a fairly classic back jacket there with a bit of hand writing on it, which I always like to see. It's a good customization. But although they're quite different in the way these things, I think there's lots of links in the way that the garments carry those visual messages and coded symbols. So I wanted to just show that comparison quickly. And then for the final part of the paper, I wanted to talk about Chasuble, so that's in the title, and in a way that's the focus that I've been thinking about. So a chasuble, as I said before, is a priestly robe, and they're worn in particular Christian branches of Christian churches, not necessarily all by any means. And I think they have some links with religious clothing in other religions as well. So the idea of the robe that's decorated, that confers something on the priest or the person wearing it, has a very ancient kind of history in a way. It goes back a long way. So this is a chasuble from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and this is a very interesting one. So it's made around 1510, and it was actually made from the coffin pall, from the shroud that would have been placed over the coffin of this abbot, Robert Thornton. And probably quite a few years, maybe 30 or 40 years after this was used on his coffin, it was then taken and reworked and stitched into a chasuble, so made into something that someone could wear. But it's interesting that it's got this RT lettering on it, which were his initials, and these repeated crests. So I think there's lots of links there to the function and the visuals of the battle jacket. So I wanted to kind of show that as an example. This is a painting that I made as part of the end of my PhD project. And this painting is called Mediator. It's about 1.5 meters tall, so that gives you a sense. It's a sort of mid-sized painting. And I painted my own chasuble that I invented, and the references in it, I guess it's quite an imaginative piece, so it doesn't need to be necessarily really literally interpreted. But the references were my way of thinking about links between metal culture and art history, because I was talking a lot in research about links between metal images and art historical images. So this figure in the middle could be taken as a kind of Christ-like figure, but it could also be taken as a sort of archetypal metal position or metal head, maybe also in that kind of psychedelic vein of hippies and counterculture. But the visual references for it were also a number of famous self-portraits by artists, including Albrecht Dürer, so a very famous portrait he did where historians think he's trying to present himself as Christ and say he's he's that good. Also Salvatore Rosa, whose paintings very often dwell on the occult and witches' sabbaths and things like that. And the creatures on the chasuble on the left and the right are from paintings by Rosa and by Hieronymus Bosch. So both of whom made paintings that in many ways prefigure metal artwork. In fact, both of them, their paintings have been used in lots of metal album covers. And there's the website, used to be called Heavy Metal Artwork, I think it's now called Heavy Music Artwork. And they trace, you can click on different artists and they show you all the examples of album covers that use that artist's work. So there's lots of interest in reinterpreting historic artworks in metal and creating this kind of visual legacy for metal that way. So this painting was supposed to do that. But I was also thinking about how the metal musician or the fan in the concert experience could be seen as a kind of a priest, as a person who is acting as a conduit between the forces of metal and the people gathered to observe it. And again, there's not really time to get into detail of how I'm saying that happened, but it's more an imaginative idea, I suppose. And here's an example, a very metal chasuble, which of course is an extended jacket. And this is from Patches and Vests, the Instagram page. I think this is the one of the jackets of the guy who runs the page. And but you've probably seen these long extended battle jackets around, which feature more patches. And you know, I would say these are like the metal chasuble. These are the aegis of metal, that cloak that covers and confers the values of metal on the wearer. And then the battle jacket, like the chasuble, is a kind of performative garment. So loads of bands wear jackets on stage. Famous example is James Hetfield, who is known for wearing a selection of jackets in stage performances over the last recent years of Masaryk shows. And then, of course, the jacket in the pit on the right. And this is a mosh pit photo from Lindsay Bishop, who's a UCL researcher. She's looked at mosh pit etiquette and how there are these various codes embedded in mosh pit behaviour. And she likens it to particular conventions in Papuan tribe communities, which again is a complete tangent I won't get into now, but her research is really interesting. I liked that image of the mosh pit with the jacket kind of going into the fray. So although they're called battle jackets and people say, oh yeah, well it's about fighting, but as we all know, you know, mosh pits can be a bit rough, but generally they're not actually about fighting with an intent to hurt anyone. They're usually more about a sort of celebration and about a physical engagement in something which is powerful. So I wanted to think about the role of the jacket in that. I'm pretty much out of time, so I'm just going to do my summary, which is to say that I've looked at how battle jackets are significant aspects of metal clothing that externalise values and narratives of metal and mark the wearer as an insider to metal culture and possibly as an outsider to mainstream culture, quote unquote. Transgressive images and text regularly feature on vests and visual transgression of perceived conservative values is common to metal. The symbols and narrative images used on battle vests and t-shirts, you could think of them a bit like priestly chasubles, both conferring the aegis of metal on the wearer, and the jacket can have performative functions that we've just seen, whether worn by the musician on the stage or the fan in the mosh pit. So that's it for me. If anyone, again, I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but if anyone wanted to chat more, obviously there's hopefully questions in a minute, but also do get in touch with me on any of those channels. So that's it for me. Shall I end the show?